Welcome to the Dream Days Network. You are watching a really special episode of Honest Participants Only, a podcast. Today, I'm really excited because I have a group of men who I think are amazing. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that because obviously Me Too and everything, but I think they're great. And so I want to introduce them to you. We're going to be talking about men and vulnerability. It's a deep subject. It's something that is important. And these men, I had to kind of twist their arms to get them on the panel. But, I've got a lot of experience in this, being a man myself. So, guys.
What's a revelation?
Okay. And we're embracing all today. If that's your thing.
That's the reason I wanted you all here. I wanted to let you know what this actually was. Yes. So, I want to find out from you guys, first of all. This is what the episode's going to be like, and that's fine. I don't mind. Ignore me. At the beginning of the episode, I'm going to speak a lot, right? Because I need to introduce you guys. I need to tell you what the theme is, why we're here, what we're doing. And then actually, slowly, I'm going to bow out because this isn't about me. It genuinely is a conversation about men, vulnerability, how society thinks of you guys, what I think of you guys. I mean, I just threw that bit in there, and we're going to really have a proper conversation about that. So my voice in it isn't important today, but at the top of the conversation, I'm obviously going to let our viewers know why we're talking about it, what I sent you guys to watch so that you could have a think about it, and we're going to go from there. But before all of that, I would love for you guys to introduce yourselves. So first of all, hello everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Did you guys notice, so for the viewers, did you guys notice the different types of hello around the room, around the table? We had Paul over there who just gave me the man nod. We had Ricardo who gave me the full on. Yeah. We had Mishak who was Mishak gave me energy. I'm grateful for your energy.
Good energy. Good
energy. Exactly.
Stop flirting with him, man. Jeez.
This is not the time or the place. Quarantine radio. Later. So, starting with Ricardo. Ricardo, tell me who you are. I know your name now, obviously, but my viewers don't. So, tell me who you are, what you do, and if I was to transfer £1 million into your bank account right now, what you do with it.
Wow.
Ooh. Okay. So my name is Ricardo Francis, also known as Ricardo Lifting. I am a PT, so a personal trainer. First, I'm also a mentor, so I train personal trainers to become qualified. I'm also a gym manager, and I host my YouTube channel, which is all about fitness. So.
Very macho.
Yeah. Yes. Something like that. I think, see, the £1 million question. So I think I would hold it back and look for investments. Part of it is going to be my business, growing my business, and etc. And I'll hold it back and see what I can invest in, whether it be family, friends, etc. But invest to remake. That's what
Love that. Tom, let me come to you. Same questions. Who are you? What do you do? And I'm going to transfer £1 million in a moment. What are you going to do with it?
Okay, I'm Thomas Mudime. I'm a menswear stylist and image consultant, so I help guys figure out what looks good on them in terms of clothing. So that's what I do for a living. And then I also do a bit of work with the youth department at my church. In terms of the £1 million, I'll probably go and buy a bunch of Zoom stock right now because Zoom is going through the roof.
Right.
and then I'll go buy a house in Islington somewhere.
Come on.
That's what I'll be there.
Your money will be done.
I like that.
Yeah, your money's over, though. You're now
money's over. The Zoom stock is going to help me out, don't worry.
Okay, Morty, let me come to you.
All right. Hi, Morty or Dwayne. Either works. Well, yeah, I do a lot of things. I work with young people predominantly, 9 to 5, and then otherwise I do podcasts and I do events as well. Which is Where's Our Wrestling podcast, also, and D&D events. We do stuff as well. Obviously, nothing at the moment because we're all locked down. But yeah, what do I do with £1 million? I'm not gonna lie, I can't think of anything responsible to do. You look like stocks and stuff. I'll just spend it. We go to Vegas and go traveling again or something. I don't know.
Not right now.
Quarantine. Yeah. Ultimately, the interest will live for itself. So I'm like, I want to go. I don't know, do something have a private party. Yeah. So I'm nothing responsible, but I can't think of anything.
Listen, I didn't ask you to be responsible that way.
Yeah, I was like, they're like that. Their answers all like build my business and invest on my enjoy. So yeah.
Misha, let me ask you the same questions.
Hey, okay. So Mishak, aka Shaq7 on all your social media outlets. I'm a professional singer. Not so much right now due to the lockdown. All events are locked down, but we'll be back. What would I do with £1 million? Essentially, I'd put some aside for my kids first of all. Got 2 daughters, and then I'd probably look into property, but I'd park it and take some time about that first.
Yeah, sounds good. I got a bunch of sensible people. Dwayne, just me and you at the moment who are just thinking like...
my family, I'm like, no, sorry.
Listen, I'm really missing Wagamama. I would just find a way to get to Wagamama, like literally. Enoch, what about you?
I'm Enoch, known as Sir Concon as well. And I'm a building surveyor. I look at buildings all day, every day, even in quarantine. I'm stuck outside at the moment, funny enough. I have to go outside as well. Sad to say I'm not one of those people stuck indoors, but that's life. What would I do with £1 million? I was just thinking about that because initially I thought, let me not be sensible, but everybody picked some sensible.
Join me, come.
You could join on quarantine radio doing this.
Come on, live.
Yeah, I can't blow it, to be honest. I think I've got too many bills, so I'll probably pay off the mortgages.
I know you really mean the heart, don't it?
We'll just keep up after the
Okay, so your first $1 million you'd pay off mortgages, but I did another $1 million. What would you do that wasn't so sensible?
Ooh, I would invest abroad.
Oh my gosh.
Hey, that's not fair.
Something.
He gets another $1 million.
Can I just say, guys, I'm not giving any of you any money. It's okay. It's not real.
Where's the log out button? Where's the log out button? Lies.
And
Thank you so much, Enoch. So, Paul.
Run my own consultancy around program and project management. More recently, producing shows, which I've enjoyed. What would I do with £1 million? I'd go back and do my PhD in the psychology of trading.
Oh, wow.
I like that. Like a Wall Street kind of thing.
And listen, brother, I don't know what that means, yeah? All I know is that I would need to work out what to do with that £1 million. That's the bottom line. If I can teach that, making money. So we're good.
And that's what I was just going to say. Do you know what I've noticed about all of you? All of you have chosen to use that $1 million to make more. And that's kind of amazing. I chose you all for this for a really specific reason. And I mentioned it to a couple of you who were on the call early. Basically, that reason is because no matter what it is you're doing, whether you're on social media, whether I'm seeing you in person, the conversations you guys have always tend to be, well, even if it's silliness, and I'll be careful because before I told you, there's nonsense in the air. But even if it's silliness, there's a lot of there's a lot of intelligent conversation and thought processes and whatever backing it up, and that's really important to me because this conversation about men and vulnerability can be quite a sensitive topic because for a number of reasons. Because number one, just in case you weren't aware, you guys are men. And I think it's Dwayne wasn't sure. And I think that it's...
And so it begins again.
Mate.
I'm gonna let her talk. I'm gonna say anything. Go on, continue, Shay.
This is exactly why I choose this forum to respond. All the years of abuse, and now I can pay back. So, I'm going to tell the listeners, I'm going to tell the viewers exactly the clip, because we're about to jump into the first question. I'm going to tell the listeners about the clip I got you guys to watch. So, by show of hands, who watched the Tahir crying clip?
Yes. I.
Paul, can I just quickly say, I know that this is a men's roundtable, but we don't have to pretend to be all the macho, okay? Like...
Is that what putting up the hand means to you? All right.
So, for the guys' homework, what I asked them to do is, and I will post this in the description below, what I asked them to do is watch a clip of a podcast from Damn Internet You Scary. There were two hosts, Tahir and Patrick, and they had a guest who was Kev. Somehow they got talking about Tahir's life, and Tahir is typically a very strong macho, typically, and I say typically, I'm not saying it from my own perspective, I'm saying it from a societal perspective. He then got talking about his life, and quite suddenly he was overcome with emotion. Now, I think that was a really important thing that happened right there, but more than that, he went on to be overcome with emotion, and the two other males in the podcast reacted in two different ways. So you had Patrick, who was like, take your time, man, do what you got to do, it's cool. And you had Kev, who waited for a bunch of the silence and then decided to fill it in order to make Tahir feel better about it. Now, I think there are a couple of things in those clips that I really wanted to speak about with you guys. Again, not specifically about the clip as such. It was much more to give you an idea of the kind of thing I'm talking about. So as you know, Tahir started crying. And when we start crying and we have no intention of crying, we do an ugly cry. Our faces, they don't do what we want. I mean, the pretty cry is kind of like, but the ugly cry, I'm not going to do it because I'm not a man and this isn't about me. But the ugly cry, it really lets you know that pain goes deep, right? So I wanted to ask you guys. I mean, I would if my iPad would work.
It's okay, take your time.
You know what? I know the kind of man you are. I know the kind of man you are. No, seriously though. The whole document gone? Or no, there it is. So I wanted to ask you guys. Still haven't asked you. I wanted to ask you guys. I wanted to know how you felt. Now, I'm not going to ask you guys individually. Maybe a couple of you want to start talking, and the rest of you, because like I say, I want to start to bow out, right? I'll just direct or I'll jump in with questions. But the first questions I wanted to kick this off with, I wanted to find out how you guys feel about watching another man in emotional pain, how you feel about that within yourself and for the person. And then I also wanted to ask what you felt about Kev and Patrick's responses. So did they make you feel uncomfortable, or how does dealing with another man's emotion affect you? And then finally, I wanted to ask you, and this can come, you don't all have to answer it, it's up to you, what you would do if another male showed unexpected and quite severe emotion in front of you. So you can go in any order, I don't mind. I want to just find out how you guys feel about another male's emotion. Don't all rush, it's fine. No, stop.
I feel like both responses were necessary. They created a good balance, because I read in the comments some people were getting on Kev for having spoken over him because they thought maybe he was like speaking over him. But I felt it showed really good awareness of maybe an aspect of their personal relationship that we are not aware of as viewers. So maybe Kev knew that he was entering a level of uncomfortable vulnerability, And so instead of allowing all the spotlight to continue being on that, he kind of took the spotlight away to give him time to compose himself. But then the other guy's name is
Patrick.
Patrick gave him permission to carry on feeling his emotions. So I think both were really important, because I think had he received the permission and then it was silence, it would have been uncomfortable. And had Kev just started speaking, it may have been like he was not giving him permission to be vulnerable. So I think both responses created a really nice balance that allowed for Tahir to express what he was expressing.
I'm with that, because I feel like I don't think Kev was talking over him. I think like it's also a show. So at the same time, if he's sons, everyone's going to zone in on him as going to give him a full awkward. I don't think what Kev did was inappropriate in any way. I just thought, and also what I think, because he knew him, so when you have a relationship with somebody, you can sometimes finish their sentences or kind of expand on their thoughts and knowing them as well. So he used kind of information about what he knew about him to kind of draw out what he was thinking and feeling at that time. And he was nodding and agreeing with it. So I feel like I think his response was appropriate, because I think he's thinking of the overall package. Because it would have been really awkward if we just sat in silence for like 2 minutes, like, and no one was saying anything. And I think sometimes, and I guess probably jumping forward, sometimes people might feel more comfortable that way when you reason through the conversation rather than sit there watching them in that emotion. You actually maybe take them. It depends what they're in that time, but that can be a pathway to a better conversation going forward. So,
and I also think it would have been a completely different outcome if it was them together in a room outside of quarantine, chilling, just having a chat or whatever. The response is they might have even gone and tried to hug him if, as we learn later on, he doesn't necessarily like that, but they may have tried that. But being that it was a YouTube interview or live chat, you can't just let it linger. You have to, there's production involved in it. You have to kind of make sure there's no gaps. So I think Kev did a great job in filling the gaps. And I think Patrick was good also in saying, take your time. So I thought they tag team very well.
Ricardo?
I do think it was a good response from both of them, and they had a good balance, and it kind of complemented the situation in terms of it became fluent conversation. You
didn't want to watch or listen. So yeah, I do think it was.
Excellent. Other guys, any views from Paul and Enoch?
I think that I largely ignored the other two. I ignored them because my rational side said, well, this is contrived. It's for you, like the other guys have said, it's for YouTube. So I was more just listening to what he was saying. I think had you, like Shaq was saying, if it was placed within real life, then that's where the kind of the interesting part comes. How would they deal with it without being on a YouTube thing or without it being filmed? What would it look like on a real level? And I think that's where it gets a bit interesting. But I largely ignored them. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Really interesting.
Really?
What did you think? No, really, really. Yeah.
I think my view on the situation was actually quite enlightening, because I knew about Tahir's story, his other story prior to listening to that, of him becoming a dad at the age of 13. And you think to yourself, like, whoa, how does someone kind of build themselves up to being what they are now? So when you see him break down, you're thinking, wow, okay, you've come a long way. And obviously your friends might know a bit more than we do. So for them to kind of chip in and one saying, cry as much as you need to, it's one of those things where how often do you cry in front of your friends? It's mostly people cry on heavy occasions, but sometimes when you actually delve into your emotions and you actually cry because it's something you're getting off your chest, then it's slightly different, because you don't know how people are going to perceive it, whether it's a matter of saying that's not being a real man is in the sense of the word, because I think it's just a matter of sometimes people overlook the fact that sometimes you have to release your emotion. Because I know my wife, sometimes she says, I need to have a good cry because I got a headache, because she's holding in some sort of emotions in there. She says, how she need a good cry. Sometimes she just watches a romantical film or something, and then all of a sudden she's crying and she's like, I needed that. And then I'm thinking, oh, well, at least she's got off whatever she needed off her chest. Sometimes she talks to me, but I think it's one of those things where guys, sometimes we don't have that opportunity to be able to just open up and say, actually, I'm holding on to something I don't need to hold on to. And from seeing it, I think it kind of opened my eyes to think sometimes we just try and become a bit macho, as Sammy was saying, Shay was saying, sorry. And I think it's one of those things where Shay made sure she made clear. So I think
Look off where.
I am so going to make the same mistake, right?
You will not. This whole podcast will shut down.
I know.
But I think it's one of those things where, from looking at it, I actually end up watching the whole remainder of that video because I was interested in trying to find out like what's involved in the discussion in general, to be honest. But from just that little snippet, it made you wonder, like, sometimes you know people from a different light. Then when they expose their vulnerable side, then you're like, oh, okay, maybe when I look at you, I have to look at you slightly different, opposed to just being the jokes, the funny. And sometimes even you don't know why they're crying, because sometimes they can tell you the reason they're crying, but really and truly they're releasing something else.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you guys, I did ask the question already, how you would feel in view of someone being emotional in front of you, but we're going to come back to that because I think Paul and Enoch brought up a really important point for me, which was the fact that you saw it so very differently. But also what I'm going to bring into that is the fact that I know you very well, Paul. And so for me, because I know you're someone who is, you've got a wealth of understanding around people's emotions and that kind of thing, I'm really surprised that you saw it as being quite contrived. Like, I really am, because I know you, and obviously everyone else doesn't necessarily know you in that way, but can you explain that to me?
Not the crying was contrived.
Okay.
The situation was contrived.
Right, okay.
It was created, so they had to give a response. Because I think
right.
So they had to rescue him.
Yeah.
And that's what sometimes it felt like, that they were having to rescue him. But I think in a real situation, that's where it gets interesting. How can that translate into
Which
a real
is what
situation?
Mishak was saying.
Yeah, because in a real situation, somebody maybe could have just kept silent. He might have just been like chilling and just waiting because he knows him. Just let him get it out and not say a word.
Let it get it out,
because you don't have to. But if it's on YouTube, then you kind of have to fill the gaps because people are watching.
There's got to be something.
You know what I mean? There's got to be, So
I think there's an element of knowledge in the friendship as well. So there's no one right response depending on who the friend is that's displaying the emotions. So I know I have some friends who they're quite comfortable displaying their emotions, certainly in our friendship or around me. So if I was silent and just let them express, it wouldn't be an uncomfortable situation. Whereas I know there's others who, for them, this is not normal. So if they suddenly broke down and started crying, it's not something which they're okay with. It's something that's just kind of come over them. And so I may react differently for them, just to try and make it a soft landing for them, if that makes sense, for their ego, because I know their ego is more in it than with the other friend. So I think there is an element of knowing your friend and adapting your response accordingly.
So how, two questions. So the same question I answered before about how you would react in the face of a friend being really emotional in front of you. And the second part of that question actually is, how would you react in light of yourself being emotional in front of your group of friends?
I think there are levels to it. Personally speaking, I'm a person who will pick my audience. So, like, if I'm going to be vulnerable, I think atypically, I guess it's easy to be vulnerable to females. I guess in that way, I feel like, maybe that's like a societal thing or a subconscious thing. It is more vulnerable to females, or I've seen examples of where I can see a friend that's trying to open up about something, and then people will take liberties with him. And I'm trying to say to them, guys, like, you don't understand. There's more. Like, I hear what you're saying. It might seem jovial, but actually, there's more to it than that. And you observe that. And if you observe that in your friendship group, you might think, yeah, do you know what? That's not the audience. And it's not some. And it depends on your own makeup, your own resilience. I don't like the word resilience, because resilience denotes weakness. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's more about what you need in terms of knowing what ingredients you need for what you need to get through your own coping mechanisms in it. So I would probably not do that. But if I was in a situation like that, I would let just enough go to be like, look, this is the situation. It's how it is, and that's you can't always control emotions. So that's
I was just gonna say, okay.
Yeah, you can't always do that. I have to admit, honestly speaking, being real, I try to do that though. I do try to do it. And if I can't, no, and you know me, I'm gonna try to lie about that. But and if I know if I feel like I can't, then I won't speak. And I feel that's why I try and pick and choose my moments carefully. So that's the truth. And so but it's not always the case. But I think it's just about knowing how to. That's why language and communication is so key. And knowing your circle and who you can be around in that regard for that reason, because they could be great friends in all regards. I think certain people excel in different areas. I believe that's just probably my take on it. I don't know what everyone else thinks.
I think the question really is about whether us as individuals feel comfortable to express appropriate emotion.
Yeah.
Because if I'm comfortable with if I'm comfortable with expressing my emotion, then I will also attract those kind of people to me as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe this is maybe a bit of a circular argument, because if I'm comfortable with expressing appropriate emotion, then when others do the same, I will understand it and receive it in a different way and interact with it in a different way. And I think oftentimes we do, like Dwayne said, we do seek to control, whether it's our response or even when somebody's having an outpouring. I mean, I've had friends who are having an outpouring and I've told them to fix their shit. Because at that moment in time,
that's what's needed. Isn't
it? It's not needed, and it's an emotion.
Well, it is needed, not needed.
But it feels like an indulgence.
Oh,
and really, we're not dealing with the real issue.
Yeah.
You're not dealing with the real issue. Like, if you're gonna cry about the fact that this woman has hurt you, well, let's go back to the fact that you cheated on her last week, and that's the reason why we are where we. Like, let's deal with the real deal. And so that's why I call it appropriate emotion, because sometimes we've got to make sense of that. Otherwise, we just become indulgent. And
yes, I'm with that.
That makes a lot of sense.
Appropriate emotion and how I make sense of my emotion.
That makes a lot of sense.
Sorry. No, go, Tom. Sorry.
No, I was saying it makes a lot of sense. That's it. Carry on.
No, I was gonna say, do you know what? And I agree with you. And so what I would say is this, and I'm gonna be real. Like, it's an imperfect system. We're all developing and changing. So, but I think in the last few years, generally speaking, male openness and male emotion is now mainstream. Yeah. And in terms of acceptability, I'm talking about male to male. I'm saying, like, in terms of that. So I feel like whereas before maybe it's more generally acceptable, whereas before it might be seen as weakness, etc. And I think that may have challenged perceptions of maturity and experience, etc. To put aside those things and want to build more healthy, inclusive relationships with your peers. Standard. That's what should be across the board. I guess it hasn't always been the case, and I think maybe a lot of people, as we get older and mature, we're transitioning to that healthier place, or we're dealing with our emotions in a more healthier way. Because if you really understand it, if you look at what we consumed as growing up, so I grew up in the 90s, right? Not giving away my age here, but and the hairline because barbs out. But well, we grew up in the 90s. Like, we grew up around toxic masculinity. A lot of words that I can't say on the show because I've read the email. But like in terms of like things that were appropriate. So
Paul didn't, clearly. Clearly.
No, but those were our influences. And as a young man growing up, we were taught, like, that's how you got to be. Like, so if you're anything other than that, it's like, well, you're the soft, Bridget. You know what I mean? So probably now it's like example. I used to grow up. Typical example. I used to love Jodeci and them thing there growing up. I used to like, I like the song, and people like, what soft shoes there, bro? I'm like, yeah, no, you're too fat, bro. Like, you know what I mean? So even saying, but now I'm growing up now, and actually you have to be who you are, true to yourself, and how you feel. But only now that transition comes later on in life, and I'm only hoping that young people see the same, because they're going for the same thing, because they grow up with this drill artist. And I'm talking too much, but that's just my quick little thought.
No, I appreciate that.
Do you know what I'm thinking?
I think the concept of the transition is hugely important, because we are not our parents and our parents' parents. And I think we are living in a different kind of society where we are having to think and challenge some of the norms that we were brought up with. Yeah. And so there are moments when I will display some characteristics, especially emotions, that look like I am being strong, but actually it's required for this moment. And then there's other moments when I will go and I can absolutely let go in whatever way that looks like to get to the other extreme of my emotion and still feel safe to do that and okay, because I'm okay with me. And I think that is an absolute journey.
Right, but you guys have mentioned transitions, you've mentioned appropriate emotion, but actually I think there's a whole bunch of things to unpick before you get to that stage, because you're speaking about it clearly from a place of having arrived on the other side of that transition and at least understanding it, not arrived at the end or being complete or being whatever, but having had a certain amount of education with regards to it. When you are brought up in that kind of men are this, in that society where this is what you were meant to be and whatever, blah, 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 without being exposed to education about understanding transitions and whatnot, you are just going to display what you think are appropriate emotions.
Agreed.
Surely.
Agreed.
Like, isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, essentially, we're talking about a blueprint, that there is something that has been laid down that I will follow. And largely you begin to see, even though I agree with Dwayne's point that there's been a shift, but there is also still a very patriarchal kind of, this is the way that you demonstrate masculinity. You know, I think that's absolutely there and still being challenged. And I think that's where it becomes a bit interesting again, because we are forced to question our own selves about what we portray. I think when I knew some of you, or when I was doing teens ministries, I was not the typical kind of masculine male. I was definitely not that, you know, and yet still, I guess it had some kind of positive impact in those young people that I was around, the guys. So maybe, you know, we are able to challenge it and still allow other people just to see that there is a different side, maybe.
I want to come back to again, you triggered another thought in me, but I wanted to ask Ricardo, did you have something to say?
I think it comes down to kind of environment, being comfortable, both if you're the vulnerable person who's explained that emotion, or whether it be somebody else. I think the environment kind of creates that. So
it was mostly about having a safe space to talk to people. So me and my group of friends, we would find
just be chilling, and if someone had to get something off their chest, they would just say, and we'll kind of listen and help them to just release. But not everyone has that, and it is quite interesting because only now society becoming aware of how to deal with it. Whereas somehow I grew up mostly through the 90s, but we as men created our own safe space because we had a circle of people that could do that and could deal with it. But I'm very much aware that not everyone has that opportunity. But I guess it's part of it might be the space that they've created with their friends, etc., that haven't displayed it.
That's really interesting to me because and it links into the question I wanted to ask from something you just said, Paul. You mentioned knowing yourself and identity, and kind of once you know yourself, you're able to kind of unpick that and figure out what is appropriate for you and what used to be when Dwayne was growing up in the 90s, what society told you had to do. And now I understand that actually I'm no longer, director of teens ministries, and so I can be all of these different things that we have. But is it? And I know you weren't trying to make it sound easy, and I know it's not easy because whether you're male or female, it's not easy because society tells you what your role is supposed to be. But is it easy? Is it that easy to one day wake up and self-identify and kind of figure out who you actually are and what's actually appropriate for you, and how being a male, how much of society's male model you fit into?
I would say that it's not easy at all because I think it takes a certain amount of experience going through harrowing experiences, or whatever level that is to each person. And I feel like a lot of the time we grow up in a space where you're blinkered, you're in a particular group, and all you see is what that group has to offer. So if you're the dominant male or part of the dominant males, then you get to say what a man is. And if you're not sure, you just have to ride with that. And if you're lucky, as you grow older, mature, you go through different experiences, you get to move to a different social group and see other people, then you may be able to see that there's other ways of being a man, other ways of presenting masculinity, and maybe start to select from those. So yeah, I don't think it's easy at all. But once you've gone through particular experiences, then you might question yourself and, begin to check yourself and see, do I know what it is to be a man? Am I a man? Am I ready to go out in the world and show, what it is to really be a man?
I think what's potentially more powerful than the societal influence in the early stages, how intentionally masculinity was modeled to you in your home, like in your family experience. Because I think if in your family experience a particular version of masculinity was modeled, and then it was echoed or accepted in your friendship circle, I think by that time you develop a certain confidence in your expression of that masculinity that will allow you to ride out in the world. But if you had no modeling in your home, like if your father was absent or if he wasn't intentionally modeling masculinity to you, you then defer to your social circle, so your friends, and then whatever's modeled there is what you then take out into wider society.
Or Fresh Prince or whatever.
Yeah, or whatever your media cultural influences are. I think in my house, I grew up I'm Kenyan. I was born in Kenya, came here when I was younger. My dad was studying at Newbold, but whatever version of masculinity he was taught as an African man, I felt had to quickly change because the economics of the situation here were different. So he had to be a lot more hands-on in the rearing up of the younger kids. He had to cook a lot more. He had to look after the home a lot more, simply because that's what was required. And so I grew up not having any aversion to duties around the house as being in conflict with my masculinity because of how it was modeled in my house. Whereas I then realized that other men did not really have that. And so even the very act of cooking or doing something in the house was really like a confrontation to their masculinity, because
washing the dishes.
The opposite. Yeah, washing the dishes, especially if you were asked to do so by a woman, it was even more of an affront to your masculinity, because not only am I having to wash the dishes, but it's at the behest of this woman. I realized that other people had something completely different modeled to them. So I think what happens in your house in your early years really forms a massive foundation to what you are confident in displaying out in the world, even if it's against what the world is telling you.
Just to add to what Thomas is saying, it's funny you say that, because I was new about today's catch up, and basically brought the subject up with my dad, because obviously in terms of how I've turned out to be who I am is more or less down to him in terms of my masculinity, as you were saying. So I was trying to find out in terms of, only now when he's older, you see the vulnerable elements that he displays, which I've never seen before. And you're like much older, you become yourself, the real you. If you're not feeling well, you say, I'm not feeling well. Sometimes when you're a man, you might not turn around and say, actually, I'm not feeling well today. And I think it's one of those things where in society they always say men will die because they've never been to the doctors. But the weird thing is, now that he's older, he displays all the vulnerable elements that growing up I never saw. And it's interesting because, like what Thomas was just mentioning, it's important that people display it, and it's important for us as young men, or men in general, to be able to kind of just say, yes, I can relate to that element of vulnerability, that actually I wasn't well, so I literally just sat in bed the whole day. Sometimes like, no, get out of bed, go about, do your business, because you're a man. And only now it's a matter of saying, actually, sometimes you just have to look after yourself. Don't base your life on what everyone else is doing. Don't base your views on things simply because every other guy is saying, I'm going to tell my wife to go cook me my meal, I'm going to do the same. It's just a matter of now realizing that sometimes it's not a matter of saying you're being vulnerable. If you're going to say, I'm going to cook a dish today or do the dishes or help in the house, it's just a matter of saying it's life. But obviously, some people look at it and say it's a vulnerable element, but in reality, it's actually a life trait that you actually use. One day you might live as a bachelor, and then you have to look after yourself. Who's going to be there?
Yeah,
Mm.
it's interesting.
Can I just ask, is there
Yeah,
a
go for it.
conflict between masculinity and vulnerability?
This is a question I was going to ask, actually. This is actually
It
what I was
depends.
going
Because
to
in
ask.
real terms,
I think historically there is a conflict for sure. You know, a lot of us have grown up seeing men supposed to have a stiff upper lip, not supposed to cry.
Yeah.
To be a man is to not show emotion. Boys don't cry. Do you know what I mean? So I think there has been a conflict, and I feel like in the current information age, especially with social media, we're seeing more people come through with a strong voice to say that masculinity can involve, you know, emotion or tears or pain or expression of that pain or suffering. So I think that conflict is being challenged for sure. But historically, I feel there's definitely been a conflict.
Are you
But I
guys
think
challenge it? Oh, look at that. Everyone's got
Sorry.
something to say. Go on.
No, Dwayne, please.
No, I was gonna say, and I have to blame the Eves, the women in this one as well. You know, see you lot. Like, no, let's keep it real here, yeah. Shay with your grease on the headpiece. Take responsibility, because let's be real. Growing up, we want to attract the opposite sex, whatever. Do you know what I mean? So in terms of we will follow. We'll look at the template, what they find attractive, what they look towards, and it's like so. Especially as a teenager.
We ain't finding all of that attractive, by the way. But anyway.
What? Girls don't like bad guys, no?
Okay.
Okay. That guy and the wife beater and the tattoos who's in prison that you like.
I said today is just so you lot are clear, today's not about me. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't think so. So rightly or wrongly, because obviously if you follow up people, you'll be following left, right, and center. But obviously rightly or wrongly, you haven't got the obviously the maturity to understand really and truly that ultimately that isn't really, you should be true to yourself, whoever you are, exactly that. But that is that's like a microcosm of somebody's character. It's not a whole character. No one's just a bad guy. The people that are layered. It's not as simple as that. But growing up, that is what is deemed as attractive or is cool or is good. So in terms of, there is that conflict. So it's in direct conflict with vulnerability, because that characteristic, there's nothing vulnerable about that guy. Even to go on.
No, I was going to say that is almost clear. We almost kind of agree with it because that's on a societal level. But on a deeper level, I want to ask you guys: is Paul's question? So, is there a conflict, but within you? So, do you guys think there's a conflict
on a personal level?
Yeah.
That's all dependent on, again, what was modeled in your house. Because for me, there wasn't clear communication, expressing how you feel, being in control of your emotion, in the sense that, you know, there were some parents, as soon as they get angry, you're getting beats. Whereas my dad was like, we'll explain it to you the first time. If you do it again, we'll explain it to you the second time. And then if you do it again, now you're just being rude and completely in rebellion. Now you're going to get the licks. But in terms of the clear communication, that was part of his model of masculinity. So as I grew up, expressing my emotion and saying, this is how I feel about this situation, was part and parcel of the masculinity I was inheriting. But if you didn't inherit that, then yeah, as Paul intimated, it's going to be in conflict with whatever masculinity you got.
And so it kind of comes down to what Mishak was saying about the fact that actually that transition then becomes really difficult, because if that wasn't modeled for you and you're now having to learn it, it means that if you're learning this new thing about vulnerability and masculinity, you're unlearning everything you knew before. So what about the rest of you? Do you guys feel that there's a conflict within you?
For me...
No,
Okay, no worries. For me personally, I didn't really feel that conflict. And the reason is because I've never necessarily compared myself to everyone else. I grew up in South London, and most people that talk to me would never think initially that I'm from South London, just because the way I've conducted myself among my peers, a lot of people my age, in a similar environment, really did kind of expose themselves to it very differently than I did. And I guess that's kind of where I distance myself from what I deemed as wrong, or doesn't go with me in terms of feeling comfortable, you know, with invulnerable states, etc. those people I couldn't keep around me for those reasons. Whereas a lot of people in that environment felt like they had to fit in. They had to do certain things to be able to fit in. And I think part of it that helped me was not ever thinking that I have to fit in. If you accept me, accept me. If you don't, you don't. And those clear lines can't help.
But that I find that amazing, and I feel like from my feminine perspective, yes, Dwayne, we've had enough of you. From my feminine perspective, I feel like you've been really blessed actually, and you're quite lucky to have had that experience, because a lot of the things I've observed, whether it's men in my family or men in my wider circles, is that actually they weren't able to just be, they weren't just able to wear a pink shirt to church and be comfortable in it and say that's your business if you don't like it. Do you know what I mean? That's a really simplistic kind of view, but I find that a lot of the guys I speak to, or a lot of the content I watch and where they're talking about elements of vulnerability, stem from people not being able to be themselves, not being able to just figure out very early on, well, actually, no, this is me and I like this version of me.
Can I manage that though? Because I don't necessarily say not showing vulnerability is not being yourself. I don't think it's as black and white as that. So I just think it's about choosing where you're vulnerable. So like because to me, I can obviously speak for me, but I can see vulnerability to me is can be like choosing a moment. So who you choose to open up to, you don't. So you wouldn't talk to your colleague at work the same way you talk to your friend for 10, 15 years, or display the same. I think, Shay, you want to say something? Go on.
I was literally going to say.
No, go on, Misha. Yeah. No, go on, Shaq, because you might say what I was going to say anyway.
No, the question on my mind was literally, it depends on the definition of vulnerability. What are we saying that is? So some people might think vulnerability literally means, oh, I'm able to cry, because that's the clip. The clip was he cried, and that's vulnerable. Others might say vulnerability means being able to be the unadulterated version of who you are, yourself, in any conversation with anyone. So I won't expose exactly what was said, but I was in a group, predominantly male group, earlier today, and there were some discussions around experiences, and some guys were like, "No, I haven't done this, haven't done that," and others were able to say,
like no clues to what that was.
Yeah, I mean.
Did Jamaican men by any chance? Were they Jamaican men?
And you know what's funny? Guys? You know what's funny? It's not even the thing you think. It's not even that deep. It's really not even that deep. Dirty. No, it's probably a family show, but it's actually quite funny. But I won't share it then, because just in case it's a family show. But so some guys.
No, it's really not a family show. It's fine.
Just in case some of them are watching. But anyway. Yeah, so there was a discussion about, do this, do that, and do the other. And in those discussions, some people will put up and shut up and wouldn't say, oh yeah, I've done that, or I would like to do that, or I would like to have that done to me, or whatever. And others would. And for me, I guess vulnerability is, if it comes in your mind that you're that person who's like, yeah, and everybody else is like, later, that's mad, that's dirty, whatever. Can you be that person, if that's you, to say, you know what? Yeah, that's fine for me. Can you be that bold? And I remember growing up in school, I had a couple of friends like that who were just, the whole class is laughing about something, and they would be the one that would say, yeah, that's me. So what? Straight face, and they could hold it. And to me, that's another version of vulnerability, to say, do you know what? Maybe it's not even vulnerability really, because maybe they don't even see it as a vulnerable thing. They're just who they are. I think a bridge across into that is to be vulnerable enough to say, do you know what? Maybe if you held up a wall before, to say, I'm going to take the wall down. That's vulnerability, and say, I can show I'm this person that my friends or society around me deems as somehow incorrect or dodgy or not part of the group.
Yeah. And I think that's the point.
Can I just say, you asked for the definition, Shaq, and it says the ability to be physically, emotionally, mentally hurt, influenced, or attacked.
Ooh.
And so
is that the only definition, or is that like one of them?
That's one. There's only one other one, and it says able to be easily hurt, influenced, or attacked.
See,
But
see, that's-
no. Let me jump in. It's kind of a question, so don't worry. I'm not making a statement. I was going to make a statement before, but it's not important. With that, because no, it kind of does bring me back to what you guys are saying, because I'm still stuck on the choosing vulnerability. For me personally, I don't know that. I think there are two sides of vulnerability: one that you choose and one that you have no control over. But with your definitions, Paul, being exposed to being vulnerable doesn't mean you're going to be hurt. Does that make sense? And so those definitions are really interesting to me because they're almost very accurate, because in order to have the best, it's a cliche, in order to have the best exposure to something or to get the best out of something, sometimes you have to let down the wall and be a bit vulnerable in order to, you can't have the best if you're not open to the worst. So to me, those definitions say, if I can be exposed to all of the bad, then that makes me vulnerable. But it doesn't, vulnerability, when we're talking about it in the male or female kind of, on that kind of spectrum, it doesn't actually mean that you're without choice, without power, or without the ability to remove yourself or to do something about your vulnerability. Does that make sense?
Because it says able to be.
Right.
And that able to be gives me choice.
Yeah.
So even if I grew up in South London, like Ricardo's saying, you exercise your power of choice to be around or not to be around. That ability to be around people that you don't share values with or whatever, it makes you vulnerable. You chose to be vulnerable and then chose not to be, because actually I could choose to be there, didn't like it, didn't work for me, I come out. But it's the ability to. Am I able to be in those positions, feel vulnerable and still be okay? So I think let's not assume that being vulnerable is a bad thing. Comes with a kind of outpouring of emotion. Doesn't have to be. It just means I'm able to be in that space and still be okay if I want to be.
I think,
okay.
So assuming with the Tahir, I think that's his name, on the clip that you sent us, isn't it the case then, like if I choose to express something about myself that I wouldn't with anybody else, with my best friend or with my wife, am I not doing that precisely because I know they are not going to attack me or hurt me? So
but there was
am
a time
I
at which
actually
you didn't know. Before,
but in
before
the moment,
in
the moment, but in the moment that I'm doing it, like I feel like with Tahir, let's assume for a second it was a private talk and he cried for the reasons that he did. Would he not do it precisely because he's comfortable that Kevin, his friend, would not?
Let me give you lot some background then. No, this is, I know, I follow all of them, and actually I watch a lot of their content and I know them and what they put out quite well. And from what I know over these years, the answer is this was unique. It had never happened in their friendship. They didn't even know about the hug thing. And actually, Kev went on to do his own kind of Instagram live, like, yo, did you see him? And in fact, the next podcast they did, they were all ragging him about it. Haha, did you see the ugly face you made? Blah, blah, blah. Because that's where they're comfortable. They went back to that place of, okay, that was really uncomfortable. And that's how real it was for them, even for Patrick and Kev watching, because it was like, yo, Tahir's not that guy, and we don't know what to do with this. But because they had been through their own transition, they had come to a place of, actually, no, vulnerability in this way is okay. They were able to then manage his vulnerability, even though he wasn't okay with his vulnerability.
I guess I'm asking because in my friendship group growing up, I mean, every friendship group has the chief, the guy who like has the emotional maturity of a melon, and you can't talk to him about anything. And so there's in that friendship. so in that friendship group, there was guys where it's like, all right, if my parents divorce, I know I can't talk to him because he's an idiot. He's not going to be able to manage this situation. But then with this other guy, I know I can talk to them because it's going to be a productive conversation. So it's because you felt safe that you opened the door. Whereas I'm trying to make sense of the definition that Paul read. Would I still open the door if I felt there was a risk of then that being used against me? And I don't know that I would.
Nah, man, man. Fucking, I agree with you. Nah,
man,
sorry.
No,
I'm with Thomas. I felt Tom.
Dwayne, please say how you feel. Don't.
No, I mean, I love that. So it's real. No, because like literally, vulnerability to me is. Do you know what? I'm gonna soften the blow and say something nice and fluffy, but love is a choice. Like vulnerability, right? So I'm saying to you is that if I am openly showing you my weaknesses, yeah, how to. But ultimately, you can't have a true connection with blockage. I understand. It's like Wi-Fi. More things you put in the way, you can't actually connect. Yeah. But I'm saying to you, if I'm choosing deliberately to connect to you, knowing that there's a risk, but that is what makes love even purer, because ultimately there's an element of risk where you can be hurt. But you have to be selective with that, because like in money or anything like that, yes, I see you a minute, young lady. 1 second. Like in anything. You have to take calculated risks. You can't just be flinging your heart left, right, and center because I want to love the world. No, like, you have to be careful. Now, Shay, go.
Maybe I should let someone else speak first. Like, do you know what it is?
I don't see anything wrong with what you said, Dwayne.
Sorry, nobody asked you. We were speaking to Shay. Thank you.
But it's about appropriate emotion, isn't it? And it's also about context. So, and that's what Thomas is saying. You're going to choose wisely. The point is, can I be able to be vulnerable? And if I can be able to be vulnerable, I will then also choose who to be vulnerable with.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But can I just say, I think when you brush, and I don't even have a problem with what you said. Actually, I'm just being facetious. But what I take from it is what other people may say in the same vein, thinking that you're meaning a certain thing. It's only because I actually know you that I know where you're coming from, and that I know that you do have a vulnerable bone in your body. But other people may not see that because you're just so macho. But I'm saying.
I will say.
No, all I was going to say is that the fact is, when you brush everything with that brush of, well, nah, bun that, fam, does that, and it takes me back to a question I wanted to ask you guys anyway, does holding in emotion, so you guys all spoke about choosing the moment, does holding in that emotion and choosing it, even when you feel it and saying, no, this is not the right moment, not because it's inappropriate, but because for whatever reason, your red flags are going up or whatever, does that damage you to not release the emotion and be vulnerable in a moment when it's needed, personally, internally, but you have in your thinking deemed it to not be appropriate?
Can I just qualify what I said? Yeah, can I just qualify what I said? So in terms of what I'm talking to specifically, in terms of answer the question at the same time, is Tom's scenario of like, my parents have been divorced and I'm not gonna have an authentic interaction with an inauthentic person. Like in terms of being vulnerable in that way, because I'm choosing. Because ultimately, I agree, you have to be vulnerable to allow authentic interactions where true connections are formed. So I'm an advocate for that. I'm not an advocate for vulnerability's sake, or putting yourself. Because actually, to answer your question, doing that is actually dangerous. Putting yourself where you're emotionally beholden to somebody who doesn't have your best interests or is on the same frequency when you actually put you in a state that's how unhealthy relationships are formed, where you're consistently vulnerable with somebody and they don't have your best interests at heart, and you're constantly trying to seek in their approval, but because you feel like you have an emotional connection. That's what I kind of think, and I'll stop there. I'll let anyone sponsor.
But I wonder if that's actually vulnerable or if that's unstable. Because if you are emotionally leaking, it means you're not. I mean, we're human. That's the bottom line. If something happens to me today, I might go and break down outside because it's fresh and whatever, and I'll speak to an entire stranger and be vulnerable. Fine. But I think as a kind of across the piece, you'd want to make sure that you've got people around you that you can be vulnerable with, without having to be, without the risk outweighing the need to be vulnerable. So can I hold it in? We're human, of course we can. Mm-hmm. Do I need to hold it in all the time? Mm-hmm. Maybe not. Is there one or two people that I can share that emotion with and be vulnerable with? Well, that's what you want to work towards, that there's that kind of balance, that I can be vulnerable with certain people and other people I don't need to be. Mm-hmm. I frankly just don't need to be. And I think that comes from a place. Sorry, I think that comes from a place that Shaq spoke about, or maybe it was Tom. It comes from an experience of having bad experiences. And I think sometimes we've got to deconstruct the bad experiences so that I don't end up feeling like I'm not clear about how I can express those emotions. I think you've got to make sense of it.
You have to be able to be vulnerable around people who are willing to let you figure it out.
Say that one time.
So what I'm saying is, if I come to you and I'm in tears, I don't understand this new kind of vulnerability, this experience, these emotions I'm feeling based on this transition I'm going through. But you're not telling me you should do this. You have to be like this. This is how you respond to this, because when I went through it this way. If you're allowing me to experience it in my way and figure it out for me, then that makes it a healthy interaction.
I think that's part and part, really, because you could have some people that can deal with it themselves. They just need to get it off their chest. Some people that are pouring out because they don't know what to do. And if you know you're the person who can help guide them towards their path, then cool. But if you're not, understand to form that relationship to say, I can't really help you. All I can do is listen. So part of it is having a healthy enough relationship to know where you stand, and knowing where your friend stands in each part of that.
I think the other thing to remember is that even though you've pulled this together, Shay, the bottom line is masculinity and vulnerability can't be understood and viewed through the eyes of femininity.
Absolutely.
No.
So therefore, the way that guys will interact, we will do like Ricardo said, and we will kind of allow space, and we'll manage it very differently, and we will be a bit boys about it, or somebody will cry and you'll be like, oh man, and we'll empathize. It may not be perceived by a female onlooker as being true, honest, even vulnerable. You know, why are you controlling it? No, actually, I think as men, we have to get to the point where we are so okay with who we are and our expression of masculinity, knowing that it's never fixed, it's always being pushed, the boundaries are always going to be pushed, that we become okay to know who's in my area.
And what I will say to the females watching, thinking that they're figuring out men, and at the end of this,
sorry
have
about that,
all the answers, is exactly that. Is exactly that. That actually, you can view male masculinity and vulnerability through your own lens. You can, but your lens isn't necessarily going to be what they are. And the same back to front. And this is why on the on the female one that we're doing, we're going to be asking about why. When females show emotion, why it's viewed as a certain thing. So it's exactly the same, but it's important that both sexes respect that about one another, I think. Absolutely.
My thing was like that, even like that, to answer that with Paul's, I love Paul's example, because I had a brethren once who was going through something mad, like, you know, like, okay, in case he ever listens to this, I don't want to expose his business, but he was going through a certain situation, and what I did, or which I was appropriate time, was he called him up, we linked up, we watched about 2 movies back to back, and that's what he needed, yeah? And I look at it, like, 2 men in the cinema, okay, you know what I mean? But he called me up. That's what he wanted to do, and I met him where he was. And the conversation, even to this day, that was over 10 years ago. Even to this day, he still talks about that, because that is how he wanted to communicate, and that was what he needed at that time. And same thing for me. I don't necessarily want to. I'm a dealer in a certain way, so I really second what Paul said.
Yeah, and that goes back to what I was. Yeah, go on.
Although let's be clear, because along this journey, I mean, even if I think about my own journey, along this journey, I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago. Certainly not the same person I was 20 years ago.
Hell no.
And if I find, and it was my grandmother that said it to me. My grandmother said when she was 75, she said to me, I've never lived this moment before. And so she said, I'm learning even now. Wow. So let's not be under any illusion that this coping strategy or this is who I am and that is fixed. Because actually, and I'm saying that to men, not to women, because women always want the men to change. But actually, I think I'm saying
I take actual offense.
Another video.
Another video. Another series of videos.
But I think for us as men, I think we have to become okay that we are evolving and learning. You know, Ricardo, if you were to go back to South London now, you'd probably interact in a very different way. And while some of it you might fall back into just being like one of the boys again, which I do regularly, ultimately I'm still not the same person.
Okay. We can literally speak about this all night, so I've got a few more questions for you guys before we start to wrap up. I want to ask you this. Is it your responsibility, your personal responsibility? And when I say personal, I mean, is it every single male's responsibility as opposed to the collective male? Because collectively, societally, the answer could probably be yes. But is it your personal responsibility to be a role model for the next person? To be aware of who's watching and how you express emotion in a healthy way and whatnot and so on and so forth?
I think it's important. I'm just speaking from receiving a phone call from my nephew this afternoon, funny enough. And I think it's just sometimes it's one of those things where a bond is to be created for the next generation, for them to be able to know what they can and can't do. And I think sometimes you don't even know that you're a role model to someone until after the fact. And it's one of those things, sometimes people always look at role models and you say it's just a male role model instead of realizing that actually there's some female role models out there who actually impact on some of today's so-called masculine men. If that makes sense. Because it's not everybody who's been raised by their mom and dad. Some people have been raised by their mom alone. Yet they're still more masculine than some of the guys who've been raised by both parents or by their dads. But yeah, it's one of those things where I think there has to be a balance between whether you consider yourself a role model or not. People still look. So you just have to carry yourself in the right way. And I think create an atmosphere where people can actually be able to be themselves at a young age and still come and say, actually, I want to talk to you about this. I want to talk to you about that. And free enough to be in an environment where I can say, I'm going to be honest about this situation or no. I think when it comes to my nephew specifically, if somebody's mistreating him, he'll ring me up and tell me somebody's doing this to me. It's not a matter of me to say, okay, now you're going to go back and beat them up or something. I think it's just a matter of saying, okay, what do you think can be done to do? It's kind of find solutions together opposed to being just find a macho response to say, do this because you're a man. Don't let anybody do this because you're a man. But I think it's just a matter of trying to find a balance to be able to work towards a point where they make a decision to realize that actually sometimes I have to find the answer myself. Yes, I have to be nurtured to get into that answer, but I think it's just being able to find a way to open up and not necessarily leave yourself to a large extent vulnerable and also saying the wrong things to someone because you never know what they take from it.
I think your primary responsibility is to be your authentic self first and foremost, and then if there's any value in that, you will be a role model. Because I think if you go into society with a mindset that I need to be a role model, it can maybe induce inauthentic interactions with people because you're trying to be something to them because you think it's what they need. Whereas if I am fully myself, it could be that I am not really going to be. I've got nephews, and it could be that my personality and me being my authentic self is not what they need from 8 to 13. But it could be that I'm going to be that on fire uncle when they're 16 because who I am is what they need at that stage. So I think the primary responsibility is to being your authentic self first, and then whatever value is in that will be the role model for those who are looking on, who are the right people looking on. You can't be a role model for everybody. I'm not for everybody. No one here is for everybody. But we are for somebody, and it's for that person that will find value in us.
I find that question really uncomfortable to answer. In part because we've got to deconstruct what masculinity is and what being male is. We got to deconstruct it so that Thomas can understand that there's part of him, the way that he was brought up when he was in New Bowl, that is going to be valuable. And then there's other parts like the licks that you're not going to do to your kid. you know what I mean? And so because I'm not going to do that, it means that I will build a different relationship with them where I'll still hold on to some of what I saw at home, but so I feel like we've got to deconstruct it first. Because otherwise, all we begin, I'm going to be so shady and I don't give a shit. We've heard for so many
Dwayne, I told you,
years.
he's worse than you.
We've heard for so many years, right? Oh yeah, I'm keeping it real. Yeah, I'm a real, and I'm like, you don't even know how to spell the word real. Because when you say that you're going to be real, and this is talking to your authentic point, Thomas. When you're talking about being authentic, you have to understand the parts of you that you inherited and the parts that were great, but also discard the rest that were not working for you.
100%.
How in the hell do you work out what is working for me and what is not working for me is a big journey. Right? Because most masculine men are going to often demonstrate a toxic masculinity. And that's going to be perpetuated. And so if I'm going to be a role model, I've got to be clear that I'm not passing on to the next generation some kind of toxic masculinity, which is what says these are the spoken rules, these are the unspoken rules, these are subconscious rules. Like, come on. Thomas, you're right. I can only be me. I can only be me.
Yeah.
Go on, Dwayne.
I mean, my responsibility is to my seed, like, till that comes to me in terms of like. No, but I'm being serious, like, in terms of on that. To like literally to my offspring who come. No, not like that. My offspring, unborn offspring, right? Wow, family show, guys. Yeah.
No, I was like, which show have we moved to?
On to the dogs.
Biology, man, biology. No, but in terms of in terms of on that cultivation, rearing level, on that level of role models, in terms of that is my responsibility of being a role model, and in terms of bespoke in that way, whereas I'm teaching them through my mistakes or my lessons or whatever I may have. In terms of outside of that, I don't believe I have a responsibility outside of that, except to expunge toxic masculinity, where I see it, or responsibility to allow someone to be open to transition. Yeah.
And is that responsibility a personal choice? So actually, Paul doesn't have to choose it, but because you choose it.
It's a personal choice, because I think it's a personal choice in terms of, I guess it's because of the work that I do. I feed into that. So in terms of, I'll take responsibility in that regard. In terms of, a lot of young people, I'm trying to show an alternative lifestyle. They may believe that they can only get such and such through X negative ways. I'm just saying you can do things other ways. And then when they say things like, "Oh, I get bare again and do X, Y, that, do that," and I see certain ideals like, "Nah, I'm going to challenge that." Or they've been robbed and they're pretending like, they got held at knife point, at gunpoint, and then she's like, "It's nothing, though." I was like, "Are you mad? Like, honestly, you are scared. Let's talk about that. Don't gloss over. Let's deal with that." So, I have full responsibility in that role, and I think I'll do that in any other capacity, any person I work with. But what I will be clear about is, I think why I don't like the word role model, because I think it feels a false ideal of perfection, which it doesn't exist. So literally, what I mean is that I only thing I would champion is the journey and the transition, which will show the flaws and imperfections along the way, but also the growth. So that's why where with your child, you have a more direct input on their day and on their daily input. That's what I'm saying to you. You have more responsibility in that regard, because they're watching how you might treat your partner. They're watching how you run the house. So you have a responsibility in that. I believe in that regard. But outside of that, I think there's more of a responsibility to encourage that journey and that transition. That's all.
Shaq, anything?
I think most of it's been said, if I'm honest. I guess the thoughts that came to me was similar to what Thomas was saying about authenticity, but not in those exact words. And I had the answer, and we've all gone around now, so it's kind of gone out of my head. But essentially, yeah, that was it. I feel like my mission is to be the best version of myself, and as I'm on that journey, that's always change and that's always improving. I feel like along that journey, those watching will just have to view what that is. And I feel like as long as I am staying true to what I believe in the moment is correct, for want of a better word, or right, I'm having
for you, yeah.
For me, yeah, only me. I'm showing love and compassion for my fellow man. and I'm doing the best that I can in every individual moment and choice, and every choice that comes up. For me, that's all I, really aspire to and really care about, and taking the best version of those choices. And I may not always do that, but again, as Tom was saying, I thought about the same thing, that it can become contrived if you think, oh, I need to be a role model. What can I do? So then you might end up living a life of false pretenses, essentially. A life not true to your own, if you're trying to be a role model. If you're trying to show a version for other people to look at that's good, what is that based on? Whose rules is that? What part of society are you pandering towards? And so for me, I like it to be about what I deem is the best version of myself as of whatever day it is today in April. I think it's 29th, 2020. Do you know what I mean?
How are we defining? Sorry, Shay. How are we
No, it's
defining
fine.
what we mean when we say toxic? Because is toxic a fixed definition? How do we know what we are to remove from our masculinity and keep it? By whose standard are we making that judgment? Because if you're in like the 1st century Near East and you're one of us, man, you might get killed before you're 25 because it's gonna be you're not fit for this environment. Because we're like, oh, we don't believe in the violence, and we don't want to be having 10 wives, and we don't want to. And all of these things, if we're saying toxicity is a fixed definition, what do we do in 100 years' time when all of these qualities are now, all of the things that we're aspiring to as men in this society are now the new toxic in 100 years? How are we defining what?
This is a great point.
Good question.
Well, this is why Shaq's point about being the best version for himself. Buddhism spark something else, because Buddhism will also say it's also what's beneficial for your society and community.
Right.
And I think we need to sometimes marry the two and make sense, because some of the ways that we've been brought up, I mean, I don't know who's been to church, but some of the ways that we were brought up, especially within church, it is absolutely a male-dominated, chauvinistic, I mean, it just goes right across. And yet that's the kind of masculinity that we will have been taught and that we will spread on. The definition of toxic masculinity, according to whatever, serves to outline aspects of hegemonic masculinity that are socially destructive, such as misogyny, homophobia, greed, and violent domination. Like, that blows my mind in and of itself, because that means when we're starting to look at what masculinity is, vulnerability is part of it. It's not something that adds on top. If you're going to display or walk towards healthy masculinity, it must include vulnerability. It can't not. And so therefore, I think if we're going to go back to Shay's question, which is about the role model, Shaq, I think you've said it great. I think it's about how I live it, but it's also about how I interact in this society and in my community, ensuring that I'm not perpetuating, violence and greed.
No, but this is what I mean. But this is what I mean, Paul, because in another time, the violence was what was best for your society. Because
Don't
if
get
I'm
me
not prepared,
started. That's another show, Thomas.
if I'm not prepared to go to the next village and kill everybody, then my village gets raided and everybody gets killed. So in order for my village to live, I have to be violent. So I don't want us to get into this. I'm just trying to say, in every stage of life, how do we judge? But I guess yours, what you read from the Buddhism is a good place to begin, because if at any given stage in your time that you're living in society, what you're doing is good for your society and for yourself, then maybe that's a good approximation to begin from, and then we fine tune it from there. I don't know.
Right, and that's why conversations like this, on this smaller scale, local scale, and on a wider, societal, London, England, world, global, whatever, black, white communities, etc., on those scales is important, because we then move it forward and we decide together what we currently feel is potentially toxic or not. And we have to have those open discussions, because, like, Thomas made a great point. What I deem as potentially toxic, someone else might be like, well, nah, sorry, I think that should stay in. If we were to draw up, say, a manifesto of what masculinity is, right? And say, you know, like what's the Declaration of Independence, or whatever the Americans have. You know, they got their amendments and whatnot. If we drew that up for masculinity, then how would we decide what goes in and what comes out? You know, and I think that would be even amongst us men that are here, that would be a very interesting conversation, let alone males in the Black community, because I'll say that because that's what we are on this particular podcast, or within British, or within Black West Indian, Africa, all the different, you know, types of cultural, you know, sections or whatever, to then decide what that is. We may have a very difficult time. However, although it's difficult, I think we should take that on as much as possible to define it for now and the generations going forward to make it better. Because, you know, I do feel like masculinity for us as men here and the world that we've come into is potentially a lot better than it was for, say, my dad or my granddad in their time. You know, being a man, they even have been able to have the discussions, have a forum like this to have a conversation. I don't, well, you know, I may be making a bold assumption, but I don't know if they had that opportunity that we have to talk about male vulnerability, masculinity, even debate the topics. Maybe it was fixed for them. So the fact that we even have this opportunity, I think we should continue to use it. And I know I will go away from this conversation better, even in a small way. And maybe some of you guys might feel the same. So I just feel like it's forums like 100%. This and more will help push it forward.
I agree, because I was going to say that. I was going to say that in terms of drawing it together, I think all can agree that the 10 wise things should stay out of the manifesto.
Remind me.
Have I turned his camera off? Sorry, Enoch, before I wrap it up, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, in terms of like all the different people who are in this group, actually make it fascinating to be able to understand what masculinity is. Because obviously I'm exposed to construction sites, per se, where everybody has to be very macho and be masculine, if you want to put it in that way. And then same thing with Ricardo, when it comes to the gym or being a personal trainer, you've got all the very butch people or buff people who are going to walk around saying, I'm going to take out the whole gym. But obviously that, then being masculine or just being showy. And then obviously when it comes down to, I think it's one of those where Misha mentioned something about singing, and it's like, if I remember correctly, growing up, it was one of those things where at a certain age group, it's a matter of saying, I can sing a high note. And then all of a sudden, once you get to a certain age, I want to hear that low note. And then all of a sudden, if you can't hit that low note, everyone looks at you like you're not man enough. But really and truly, that doesn't really dictate your masculinity. But I think it's one of those things, as you grow up, it's one of those things where you realize that you can't be judged by how you look or where you are or how you carry yourself, whether you're masculine or not. And I think just being able to see those pictures, which we've been able to kind of see in this group here, I think it's helped me understand that you're never really going to put a label on someone's masculinity as such. And also in terms of vulnerability in itself, I think it's one of those things whether we like it or not, we're all vulnerable. And I'm just learning to actually understand that there's more to it than we see. And I think just being exposed to everyone's mindset in this forum has really helped me personally, similar to what Mishak said as well.
So in wrapping up, I'm so grateful to you guys. I'll thank you properly in a minute. But honestly, what I have taken from a lot of what you've said is, well, some of the points I've taken are that it's not something that can be answered or defined in an hour and a half podcast. It's just not going to happen, and nor should it be. It also is something that needs continuous exploration, conversation, involvement. It just needs to be something that is safe to speak about, because as Paul said, as I think Dwayne said, at different times, you're constantly changing, and if you don't stay the same, then your view and your perspective on things will also change, which means that in a few years, if we had this exact thing again in 10 years, you all might think something slightly different. I actually doubt you would, but I'm just saying the possibility is that you'll be like, well, no, the experiences I had between 2020, which was the most rotten year of the decade, and it's the first year of the decade, and 2030, my experiences have really coloured how I viewed things, and so that makes this different. I wanted to say that because I know you all, the viewers won't know you all, and you all don't necessarily know one another, but because I know you all, I think you are some of the most best placed men to have this discussion. And I'm so glad that you were able to have it in an open way, that none of you were vulnerable. There were no secrets shared. There were no tears. If I wanted to go there, if we had longer, I would have tried to get it there. No, I'm joking. But I genuinely think that I would love to do this again. And I would love for you guys to then take it out to your networks and do it in your networks and make sure that it is with honest participants only as well. So I'm not talking about using my platform. I'm saying do it in your own, do it on your own podcast, continue the conversation so that we watching, as in society, and also females, and then also other males, we can all start to learn something from it and understand that my experience isn't the sum of who the people I'm watching are. Does that make sense? Now I understand another experience because I heard this other person speak on it, rather than it just being, no, this is what I know about vulnerability, and therefore this is my truth, and I'm going to now apply that to every single person I see. Yeah. So I would like to go around the room, the table, because it's meant to be a round table talk, I forgot. I would like to go around the table and just ask you guys to say something to anyone watching, any men watching, whether they're young, old, 98, 8, whatever it is, about just how you would wrap up today and what you think about, what you would want them to know about vulnerability and how they're feeling. So, Shax, let's start with you.
I would refer you back to my last diatribe. No. I mean, the first thing that came to me actually was choose your friends wisely. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I say that is because selecting your friends will allow you to, over time, ease into vulnerability, because sometimes you can have particular friends who don't give that space, and particular friends may project what it means to be a man onto you. And when we become aware of that, it's important to separate from particular types of friends and move on to others that will allow us to be who we want to be and who we are. So that's, I just thought I'd share that because that just flipped into my mind.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Paul?
I think I'd say understand that this life is a journey, and you're not the same person, or you shouldn't be the same person that you were when you were growing up. And so you have permission to construct your identity, your masculinity, the way that you choose. So, and because when we look outside in society, we see that there are so many different demonstrations of masculinity. Have permission. You have not got to be your mum, your dad, your granddad. You haven't got to do that. You ain't even got to be like Christ, because that's not possible. So to get that in, weren't you? So to be quite frank, go out and right.
Thomas, I got like 5 shows.
Just go out there and be open to learning about how you might be able to do it differently, because it's all okay. Like, not every version of masculinity is okay, but it's okay for you to learn along this journey. It really is.
Can I just say you're annoying? You stole my last line. I was coming to the end of the show and my last line was going to be yourself, and that's okay. You're so annoying. Enoch?
He's not here.
He's either sleeping or he's frozen. I don't know which.
Oh, actually,
Like
he's
this.
frozen. Yeah, he's frozen, unfortunately.
Okay. Morty.
No, I was gonna say I'll first say listen to what's being said after what I said and before what I said in terms of what Shaq and Paul have said, because I think it's surround yourself, have important conversations that allow that growth and that dialogue that continues your journey, improves you. Cliches are cliches for a reason, because I guess they're often said because they're applicable. So iron sharpens iron in that regard, but also be your authentic self as well. So I think a lot of the conversations that even now that we've got, literally I've come away with a lot of things. So if I can have that in this hour, imagine what you can do with your friendship group. So I'd say be who you are, don't be comfortable with who you are. And also, and just choose your friends wisely. And my battery's trying to kill me. And and love each other and buy better technology.
That one. Okay, Enoch, did you hear the last question?
I think I did.
So just what would you say to anyone kind of watching about, the theme?
Don't be scared to be yourself. And create where you can literally be yourself.
Okay.
So I think if it's just one of those things where if you can find people you trust to be open with when it comes to the things you're going through, be it emotional or just in general life, when you start opening up about generally in life, you find it easier to open up about your emotions. You find it easier to reach certain subjects that you don't necessarily tend to get taught in school or in church or wherever you are. I think it's one of those things where it's an unspoken subject that exists that needs to be had. But I think it's one of those key things that, like, we've created this forum here, we've been able to sit down and talk about it. And yet, I came in the room slightly as a stranger, but I'm walking away thinking I actually know a bit more about you guys as well. So I think it's one of those things, like, whether you like it or not, when you surround yourself with like-minded people, it's easier to open up. It's easier to be yourself.
Yeah.
Powerful.
Ricky and then Thomas.
Yeah, so I do think it's a learning curve for everybody. It's constantly changing. Masculinity is changing. Vulnerability is changing. What it means to be vulnerable is changing. And there's no set way to do it. There's no one way. There's ways that might become more comfortable for some people and other people. It all depends on your environment. So kind of summing up is, first you have to be comfortable with being vulnerable within yourself. I think that's the first and foremost, understanding, okay, what makes me vulnerable? What am I dealing with? And then how do I go about dealing with it? Whether it be being in your circle of people that you can be vulnerable with, whether it be taking yourself away from everything, just find out what works for you. Because I said there's no right or wrong way. But understand that you are who your friends are. You are a product of your environment. So make sure that that environment reflects you and allows you to be vulnerable, I guess. That's what I'm saying.
Amen. Thomas.
I think everything that's been said is perfect. I would probably say that whatever it is that you authentically are and are becoming, don't be afraid to be that, because the world needs that. So I guess I'm speaking to the guy who maybe is projecting some other version of masculinity because he thinks that's what's required. Actually, whatever you are and whatever this journey you're going on is, that's what's required in the world. And I think if your voice is missing from this manifesto that Shaq was talking about, because you're trying to be something else, then when this manifesto is finished, your voice will be missing from that final definition, and we will be short as a result of it. So be you. We need you to be you. So yeah.
I just want to thank you guys so much. This has been a great discussion. I know it was longer than expected, actually. And I said to you, we won't use all the time. And look, we basically have. But I thank you for being a part of it, for being willing, and for being vulnerable and open. So to everybody watching and to you guys, it is okay to be yourself. And Yeah, spread it around. Not that, Dwayne. So.
Oh, wow.
We finished in the dungeon.
With that being said, bye-bye. Say bye, guys.